Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Infill Voices, and this is one of our regular webinars where we talk about many issues. And today we're going to talk about equal representation in Parliament for women. And we've got Frances Scott with us, who has been campaigning for this for a long time and started the 50-50 campaign, which she's going to talk about today. She also recently joined us and spoke at House of Commons meeting with Rachel Reeves, who has recently written a book called Women in Westminster. And that was a really very good, well-attended meeting. Now, just before I introduce you and we start, let me say, if you've got any questions, any comments, then please type them up in the Facebook comment section under the window of the webinar, and we'll try and pick up some of those questions if we can. But anyhow, let's go ahead. And Frances, thank you for joining us, and it's good you've done several events with us, and it's great that you're doing this, which I think is the first time you've done a webinar. You always do it in real life with a banner and everything, and you've still got your banners now, which is great. So let's ask you first, because I'm sure most people know, but in case anybody doesn't know, what is the 50-50 campaign?
Well, 50-50 Parliament is, we are what we say on the tin or on the T-shirt. I sometimes feel a bit like a walking billboard, in the same way that the suffragettes used to go around with signs saying clearly what they wanted. We're a bit more Catherine Hamnet in style. We have T-shirts that say what we want, which is gender balance in Parliament. In fact, I would argue that what we really want to do is build a better democracy and make sure that the majority of people that are women feel that they are able to participate. And if they're not able, then we need to be sort of addressing those particular issues. So we're campaigning for better gender balance at Westminster. And ultimately what we would like is for women to have equal seats and equal say. It actually started in 2013 when I put up the 50-50 petition, but more recently we've launched the Ask Her to Stand campaign. So we're now actually asking people to ask women to stand, and we've had over 600 women sign up to stand via our website. And
I'll ask you about that in a minute.
Okay.
That's quite important.
That's our latest development.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that because, that's a really successful project you're doing. But I think people might like to know how you got involved. What made you so sort of passionate about this?
Okay, well, let's first, we'll look at the statistics. In the last 100 years, there have been 5,000 MPs elected. So since women first won the right to vote, there have been 5,000 MPs elected, but fewer than 500 have been women. So there seems to be a problem there for women gaining access to the corridors of power. People think that the last election, well, people think that this is getting better and things are changing. They are, but at the last election, only 12 extra women were elected, which means it will take another half century, 50 years to get gender balance in the Commons. We only need 116 more women, but currently men outnumber women 2-to-1 in the Commons and 3-to-1 in the Lords. So, and the most women, extra women that were ever elected was in 1997 when 60 extra women were elected. So the question is, why does this matter? It matters because representation shapes policy, and we need women to be involved in all decision making. Take, for example, equal pay. It was a woman that had to fight hard for women for legislation concerning equal pay. And more recently, pay transparency. It was a female MP that had to campaign hard for pay levels to be made transparent. And this really has had a massive impact on women's lives. There's another sort of funny example, but tax on tampons, which are taxed as luxury products. And when President Obama was asked, why do you think there's tax on tampons? He said, well, because it was men that were making laws when those taxes were passed. So the reason we need women's voices at Westminster is because representation shapes policy.
I understand why,
Yeah.
why, but what I'm quite interested in knowing is how you...
My story?
Yeah, your story. I mean,
Okay.
I mean, is this something you've always believed, or did something happen in your life that made you say, I've got to get involved?
Okay. Well, what triggered it for me was I used to be in business. I was what's called an operations analyst working for a firm of accountants in the 1980s or so. And I kind of always felt when I was a younger woman that, you know, women had equality. When I got married and had kids, I was very involved in parenting, and I trained to be an antenatal teacher. And I worked as an antenatal teacher, helping parents prepare for birth and parenthood for over 25 years. In 1993, there was a report produced called Changing Childbirth, with all sorts of recommendations about how maternity services could be improved to enhance women's experiences and improve birth experiences. But 25 years on, I was still having to basically comfort women who'd had pretty traumatic time in our maternity services. And most of the recommendations that had been made just hadn't been implemented. And this really made me angry. And I just generally felt that Westminster did not seem to be in touch with the lives of women, or even make their lives and maternity services anyway a priority. And when I looked at the makeup, being the operations analyst that I am, when I looked at the makeup of Parliament, I realized that we certainly didn't have gender balance, and that we were a long way off from getting it. And it just struck me that our decision, it's meant to be a representative institution, and our decision-making bodies should be gender balanced when it comes to running society. So that was one of my personal stories, added to which I'll tell you a more amusing one. My daughter, when she was 8, I went to meet her from school, came bounding out of school, and she says to me, "Mom, I've been elected to school council." I said, "That's great, darling, you're representing the class." She says, "No, of course not. There's always one boy and one girl from schools on school council, because our experiences are different." And she said, for example, they don't understand the dilemmas of whether girls should wear skirts or trousers to school, and we don't understand why the boys' toilets get so dirty. And I thought, ka-ching, ka-ching. You know, they can get it at primary school, surely. You know, kids are equally involved in running their school council. Women should be equally involved in running the country, planning the future.
So how did you kickstart it? You had this passion, and so how did you get things going?
Yeah, I had this passion, this frustration, and then an elder daughter, this is some years on, because I mean, frankly, I was fairly busy running a house, working, didn't have time for activism. And but later one of my daughters had left for university, and she said, "Mum, stop talking about it, do something, copy the No More Page 3 campaign, put up a petition on change.org." So that's that, and I thought, wow, yeah, that's a great idea. And I put up a petition, I learned how to do Twitter, I learned how to do Facebook, and started to communicate. And then I got some t-shirts printed. I went to something called 1 Million Rising in Trafalgar Square. I met someone called Baroness Scotland. I didn't know who she was, but she pointed at me in the crowd. She said, "Yes, that's what we need." And she was good enough to come and stand with me and have a photograph. That was in February 2014. And I later learned, of course, that she was a peer and a QC. And I thought, my goodness, if a woman with that kind of experience and eminence understands the need for this, then, you know, that makes sense. That's great. Then I must continue.
So you sort of did a Greta Thunberg in a way before her time, and stood there and waiting, and you got the campaign going. But why do you think it is that historically women have been so underrepresented?
Well, I do think there are many barriers to women's participation, and these need to be addressed. I think parenting is a fairly major barrier, in that women traditionally have played the role of main parent, and whether that's sociological or actually psychological, whether women are drawn to parenting, you know, more than men, I mean, who knows? And I don't really want to get into that argument. But anyway, so our gendered stereotype roles have been that men go out to work, women stay at home with kids, etc. And I do think so. That's one thing that has gone against it. Women's participation, reluctance perhaps to leave children. However, we can overcome that. The House of Commons, the average age is 50. There are many MPs who are much older. There comes a point in women's lives when they are empty nesting. Politics makes a great second career. So we could develop returnership programs, encouraging women whose children are older to participate. I would also argue that actually parenting should be a shared responsibility, and this is, it should be possible for men to participate in parenting. And in fact, many female MPs at Westminster say that they have the great, fantastic support from their partners if they have small children in helping in the parenting sphere. So that's one thing I think that has not been helpful in the past, but it can be overcome. The other thing is vitriol. When women put their head above the parapet, social media, Twitter trolls, women receive, evidence suggests, about 3 times as much trolling or vitriolic comments to men, and they tend to be, sometimes it can be very personal and aggressive, and this to some extent puts women off. You've got to be made pretty stern stuff. Obviously you have men too, experience this, but women it's even worse, and especially when there are threats against your family. So this needs to be addressed, and I'm very pleased that in fact this kind of thing is being looked at.
So why do you think women get all this vitriol and this abuse? Why women particularly? I mean, you're right, men get it, and quite a few men get it, but women get some really nasty things happening, and death threats and all sorts of things.
I think it's because the women who are brave enough to sort of try and push the boundaries as far as women's representation and actually, improving actually access to power, experience, the backlash and from more traditional minded people. I don't really know why it is. I just think it needs to be addressed, and it's wonderful that campaigns are starting. There's one called Glitch, which is really campaigning on this. The Fawcett Society has been pretty vociferous, and indeed Parliament is looking into this. And female MPs are taking action. If they do experience violent or threatening comments, they are reporting it to the police, and the police are dealing with it. It has to be dealt with. And, sadly, the experience, the tragedy of Jo Cox is something that's ever present and one has to be mindful of. And this, of course, can be, is a hurdle that we have to overcome. And that's kind of why we've set up Ask Her to Stand. We are like the New Girls Network. We want to support women because they do need additional support to overcome these barriers. But those are just 2 that we've touched on. Another one is money. To be engaged in political campaigning requires quite a bank, financial support. And as women, it's proven women tend to earn less. And therefore they have less financial resources at their disposal. Sometimes they're financially dependent, not sometimes, but often they're financially dependent, so they have less choice about how to spend the money, particularly if they wanted to spend it in the direction of advancing themselves in politics. It might be less, they might have less freedom to do so. Again, it's fantastic that the parties are starting to address this. The Women's Equalities Party definitely supports women, and, for example, offering childcare and all sorts of additional support. And I understand, that there are all sorts of bursaries with the Labour Party, and indeed the Conservatives are starting to offer this. So that's great. Then the other thing is time. And as I say, because women do much of the unpaid work and are very often in paid employment these days, women tend to have less time at certain points in their lives than men. So this all then, so what it translates into is an incumbency issue where younger men sort of start to occupy the seats, and then they sit there, and then the possibility for women to get involved, or the seats coming up, is sort of reduced. So these are the sort of hurdles that women face, added to which, of course, women are the diverse majority. So within the majority that are women, there are minorities such as BAME women, women with disabilities, and these women experience multiple hurdles to political participation.
So, I mean, I was going to ask you about which political parties respond most or best to your campaign, and you sort of answered that. But, I mean, is there another reason why women find it difficult, or did find it difficult, to get into the House of Commons? I mean, we've had women's votes now for a century, but the House of Commons is a very male place, isn't it, traditionally? There's a lot of yabu politics, adversary politics, and in a way, does that put women off? And it's, you know, it's taken a long time for them to get into that culture and try and change it.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, there's plenty of evidence that the culture of the place women find unattractive. As you say, this is a rugby club feel. I mean, definitely the clubbishness and the combative nature of politics can be quite unappealing to women. I would also argue that it's unappealing to many men. And that's why women's inclusion is a kind of barometer of general inclusion. There are probably many talented people who would take a little look at the way Westminster operates and might not be attracted by it. And that's problematic. So if these issues are putting off half the population that are women, then we really do need to be addressing them. And I think that the Speaker has recognised this, and he does try to intervene when things get too vitriolic. But the other thing, for example, when it comes to women's voices, there are many traditions that actually undermine women's voices. So the Speaker tends to, I think there's a tradition whereupon the Speaker is obliged to call upon people who've had seats for longest. So it's the incumbents that have more right to speak than newcomers. So a newcomer MP has less right to actually put a point than people who've occupied the benches for longer. And given that, you know, women are generally newer to the House, they have less right to participate and less right to speak. So there are many traditions, the tradition of bobbing up and down in order to gain the Speaker's attention, for example, during PMQs. This predicates against those who might be wheelchair bound, for example. So we really, I would argue, again, as an operations analyst, we need to be taking a little look at our democracy and our systems and the way the institution operates to ensure that everybody can participate. It is called the House of Commons, and we should all feel welcome and able to take part.
Okay. You've got your campaign going, and one of the first things you did was to have a petition, which I gather was very successful. And now you've got the Ask Her to Stand campaign. Now,
yes.
Now, what's the sort of result of that? I mean, what response have you got? You've got, hashtag Ask Her to Stand. You're trying to get more women involved, and I mean, how do you encourage them? Do you provide any training? You mentioned support. What support do you give?
Well, we launched Ask Her to Stand in 2016. The wonderful thing about 50-50 is that we've got fantastic cross-party support. In fact, all the parties have now said that a gender-balanced parliament would be better. So that's one result. Labour have made it clear that they would actually aim for 50-50 50-50 gender balance of their elected MPs. The Conservatives have said they want 50-50 shortlists. So that's all great. What we do is we organise events and we encourage women to ask others, well, and men. We encourage people to ask women to stand, and we then encourage women to sign up to stand. And so, for example, last November, the 21st of November, which was 100 years after the Qualification of Women's Act, 100 years, we were celebrating 100 years from when women were actually legally allowed to stand. 200 MPs invited women from all over the country. Over 300 women attended Westminster that day. And obviously our message was loud and proud, please sign up to stand. And within a week or 2 weeks of that event, 150 women had gone on to sign up to stand via our website.
So can I ask you, I mean, if they do that, I mean, do you give them any help? I mean, some of them may not even know how to get into politics or a political party.
Absolutely.
Do you provide the help and the guidance that they need?
That's absolutely right. So now what we're in the process of doing is setting up a kind of mentoring and monitoring program. The monitoring is just as important as the mentoring. So we have, as I say, contacts. We have an Ask Her to Stand director for each party. And what we're now doing is gradually putting in a network of mentors. And we hope over the course of the next year to probably have about 100 mentors in place, each mentoring about 5 women, between 5 and 10 women. And basically, a mentor is a bit like a cheerleader, encouraging them, helping them take the next step, making sure that they know about what's going on in their particular party, and making sure that they know who it is they should be talking to. And as you rightly point out, for women who haven't yet decided where their political allegiances lie, we can talk to them, give them advice, help them go through the manifestos and decide which political party where, you know, they would like to sort of be with, you know, where they want to sort of throw their cap in the ring.
And have you had any MPs who volunteered to be mentors?
Oh, well, yes, actually we haven't, but that's a great idea and we might. But I do want to tell you one success story. It was in 2015. I was invited to speak at the University of Canterbury about the 50-50 Parliament campaign. And a young woman called Rosie Duffield called me and said, look, I love your campaign. I said, great, let's meet for a coffee before I catch the train. And she clearly knew a lot about politics. And I said, you should stand. And she raised all the normal objections. Oh, they won't choose a woman. And anyway, she was Labour, and she said, this is a Conservative constituency. And I said, you never know till you have a go. And so I asked her to stand. And what do you know, 2017, Rosie Duffield was elected to Parliament. So it kind of proves it works. There's plenty of evidence in the States, for example. They've done some research into this, that women need the encouragement. They need to be asked. Men seem to have the self-confidence. Politics looks right for them. But women need to be asked 3 times, it seems, before they will contemplate it, for all the reasons that we talked about at the beginning of this webinar. And that's why we really do want to be asking people to go out and ask women to stand if you know a woman that you think would make a great MP. And I want to add, it's not just about representations, it's about resources. Women are 50% of graduates, you know, they're 50% of the opinions and experience that this country has to offer. And Parliament should really be drawing upon the widest possible pool of talent. It's also about responsibility. In that it's women's responsibility to sort of plan the future. We want to be working together with men. And finally, it's about respect. Parliament should be showing respect for women and opinions and demonstrating, spearheading the changes that need to be made within an organisation to ensure that women can participate equally. So I put it down to the 4 R's.
And have you thought of extending your campaign to the European elections and to councillors, for example? I mean, in councils, it's much more male-dominated than even the House of Commons. Is that a step too far for you at the moment, or are you moving in that area?
Well, I'm really pleased you asked that question. You have to be very clear when you start to try and make a change, to be clear about what your aspiration is. So that's why the campaign is called 50-50 Parliament. But the spin-off is, for example, with our Ask Her to Stand Day on the 21st of November, many of the women that came actually were inspired to stand, and they chose to stand in the local elections. And several of the people who came to us actually won seats in the local elections. And in fact, one was a wheelchair user. And it's just wonderful that she's been elected, and she's completely thrilled about it. She stood as an independent. So the spin-off from our campaign is that women are getting more involved in politics generally. I'm afraid I can't claim to have any 50-50 people in the European elections. I haven't looked into that actual aspect, but I'm sure that some women who are standing have been inspired to do so by us just being there.
Yeah, I mean, your campaign, 50/50, is also now a global campaign, isn't it? It's in many other countries. Is this something that started spontaneously, or did it come from your campaign?
Oh, I think it started spontaneously. And the other thing I'm really pleased to say is that the BBC have launched something called the 50/50 Project quite recently, actually. And I think that they were definitely inspired by us, because I know that the BBC is aware of what 50/50 is doing and have been following us quite closely. So I'm interested that they've started now the 50/50 Project, and they're asking different aspects of their organisation to review their gender balance and ensure that they're working towards equal representation. Yes, I just want to add here that, Henry Kissinger said, there will never be a battle, no one will ever win the battle of the sexes, because there's too much fraternizing with the enemy. We're not here to do battle. We're just here to, work together. We want to work together with men. And it's wonderful, Francis, that you've invited me to talk, because we have many men that support the campaign, and many men who are actually very actively involved in supporting us and working behind the scenes. And we need everybody's support to make this happen. So I really appreciate the support we get from all quarters. So thanks for the invitation to be on the webinar.
Well, thank you for coming. And you talk very eloquently, you know your topics. So I suppose I have to ask you, have you ever thought of standing as an MP yourself?
I most definitely did. In fact, before I started the campaign, there was so much that made me cross. I thought, oh God, I need to be at Westminster to change this stuff. But unfortunately, as you alluded to at the very beginning, when I looked at Westminster and I realized that the kind of things that I felt very strongly about, most people there would not share my concern. And anyway, the kind of environment just didn't look welcoming. So I decided, in fact, that the best thing to do was try and change the institution rather than stand for Parliament, which is maybe a bit of a grandiose aspiration, but you've got to start somewhere.
Well, it's not grandiose, because if you have one issue that you're passionate about, being an MP sometimes becomes difficult because it gets lost in the milieu of everything else, whereas you kept in a way your mission purity, and that's important to you, isn't it?
It's completely important to me. I'm just very concerned about women having equal seats and the possibility of sitting on those green benches next to men. The back benches, the front benches, in both colours of benches, red and green benches, on both sides of the House. And to my mind, this is a non-partisan issue. It's about inclusion and accessibility. And as I said at the very beginning, it's about building a better democracy, because the decision-making will be better for everybody.
So do you think you're going to succeed, and we're going to see a day when there is 50/50 parliaments here and elsewhere?
Oh, of course, I think we're going to succeed. I mean, I want 60 extra women elected at the next election. And I'm sure with all the candidates that we've got, who are prepared to stand for the various parties, that should be possible. And if we had 60 in the next election, so the 2 elections upcoming, after a decade of democracy, we're calling it the decade of democracy, we would have a gender balanced parliament. So that's our aspiration.
Okay, and so for other women, who want to get involved and go in politics, what is the basic advice you give them? Well,
I mean, we really do want to sort of get a huge pool of women. We want women on the path, so that all the parties can draw upon. So I really would encourage women to sign up to stand, but not everybody wants to stand. And actually, we only need 1 in a million to be there. So the other way you can help the campaign is joining to become an ambassador, or if you just want to receive our newsletter, is just press the join button. And we don't charge to be part of the 50/50 Parliament campaign, where, again, it's really important to me that we're seen to be accessible and inclusive. So anybody can join by pressing the join button, and that way they'll hear about what's going on.
So is that the best way to make contact with you, through your website? And what is your website?
The website address is www.5050parliament.co.uk. You said I could type it in, shall I, or will you?
I'll send it out to people.
Thank you so much.
They probably won't keep this, but I'll make sure people know. So, okay, well, thank you very much for doing this. I mean, we've sort of come to the end of our sort of half an hour, and it goes very, very quickly indeed. And, you know, I think it's been very, very interesting. And I know the work you've done has been fantastic. And I know from the meetings you've attended with us in the House of Commons, your passion is still high and strong. So that's really, really great. And you always bring your banner, and you always wear your T-shirt. So even if I didn't know what you look like, I know where to find you.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's not really about me, it's about the message. So like the old suffragettes, we just go around wearing the, you know, wearing the billboard.
Yeah, no, and that's great you do that. Okay, well, thanks very much. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people will find this really, really interesting. So, you know, thank you for joining us, and we'll end this webinar now.
Thank you ever so much, Francis. Bye.